Good morning and welcome to this webinar that we're hosting for you today, all about reducing embodied carbon in infrastructure projects and across the entire supply chain. My name's Laura, I'm part of the communications team here at OneClick LCA, and we're joined here today by some of the team from one of our customers, Vital Energi, who are going to be sharing their insight and some real life examples of how they're approaching the reduction of embodied carbon within their projects. And in addition, I've also got one of my colleagues, Chris Saunders, who works with infrastructure and construction companies across the UK to help them decarbonise a range of projects. So before I hand over to our speakers in a moment to introduce themselves, I'll just tell you a bit more about what's coming up in this session today. So we'll meet our guest speakers in a moment, and then I'll be handing over to Chris and the team for half an hour or so to lead a discussion about this important topic. And then you'll have the chance to put your questions to our guests. So please go ahead and drop those into the chat box or the Q&A box that you should be able to see down the right-hand side of your screen. We'll come to those later on. We do have a lot of people registered for this session, so do get your questions in. We'll do our best to answer as many as possible. And then later on, you'll have the chance to answer a poll just to let us know if you'd like to speak to us, have a custom demo or conversation about your own projects and how the OneClick LCA team can help. And this also applies if you're an existing user of OneClick LCA. So if you want to talk to our customer success team, we can arrange that for you as well. So without further delay, let me pass over to Chris and the Vital Energi team.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and maybe afternoon for anybody that's joining from elsewhere outside of the UK. Just a little bit of introduction. My name's Chris Saunders. Obviously, I'm one of the senior business development managers here at OneClick LCA. I've been in the construction software industry for around 16 or 17 years. And I've headed up the infrastructure side of the business here at OneClick LCA for just over 2 years. A little bit of a background on OneClick LCA with a world-leading decarbonisation platform for construction companies and projects around the world, with the largest database of construction materials in the world. And we work with both manufacturers, architects, consultants, developers and contractors to help them monitor, manage and reduce their embedded carbon on their projects. And specifically today, we're going to be talking about, obviously, infrastructure projects. Again, one of the things that I've noticed within the industry since I've joined is the sort of pattern of how now infrastructure, probably in the last 18 months, has started to really gain momentum in the need to have solutions in place to reduce the amount of embedded carbon that they have in their projects. So again, that's what hopefully we're going to be talking about today. I will pass over to Anne, who will give us a little bit of an intro around herself and Vital Energi. Anne.
Thanks, Chris. So hi, everyone. My name's Anne Johnston, and I'm head of ESG at Vital Energi. So who are Vital? We are one of the leading low carbon renewables companies in the country. We specialise predominantly in decarbonising heat. So heat networks, heat pumps. We also do solar farms and battery storage, and we have 2 energy from waste plants as well. So we are very much kind of at the forefront of decarbonisation. I've been with the company for just coming up for 2 years now, and my own background is actually more in the kind of built environment. So I had, kind of like seen the embodied carbon and things like solutions like OneClick in more of the kind of like building construction side of things, and have obviously had quite a different view coming into infrastructure, and that's something that we'll cover as the session progresses. But I'll hand over to Tom now to do an introduction.
Hi, so I'm Tom. I'm the Senior Environmental Advisor at Vital. I've been here 4 years, and as Anne mentioned, that we do a lot of different projects and have a lot of different work streams. So part of my role is to advise and lead on embedding environmental and sustainability into those projects, and part of that is around sort of material data and sort of reporting on the embodied carbon and other aspects of the projects in terms of carbon. So that's been what I've been doing over the last 4 years, and that's to help both clients and Vital Energi reach certain targets that have been set. So I'll just that's basically me. So I'll just pass on to Gemma now.
Hi, I'm Gemma. I'm a sustainability graduate engineer at Vital. I've been with Vital for about 7 months now, and I am mainly collecting all of the data to input into OneClick, which is lots and lots and lots of information. And I'm sort of the main user of OneClick and sort of finding out how that best facilitates whole life carbon assessments in this sort of renewable infrastructure.
Great stuff. Thank you very much indeed, guys. Thanks for great introductions. So I think we'll probably just start off. Anne, you mentioned at the beginning, sort of, and probably similar to myself, from the built environment. Obviously, there's quite a few changes that have obviously come in. We've seen obviously a big surge in a need for one-click solutions to help projects manage and reduce embedded carbon on infrastructure projects. What sort of Vital Energy's view on what's driving this surge? I mean, again, just your personal views or from within Vital, and what's happening internally around embedded carbon on your targets? How are you setting those targets and those reductions within Vital Energy on your projects?
Yeah, obviously for a long time the focus within Vital has been on reducing operational energy consumption for our clients. That is what we do. But what is driving kind of where we are now, both as a business ourselves with our own net zero targets and in what we are delivering for our clients, is the increasing focus on their scope 3 emissions. So and also I think there's a little bit of that kind of the cost benefit analysis in the business case of of doing some of these renewable infrastructure projects does change as the grid carbonisation factor changes. So things like the embodied carbon side of it, maybe it just wouldn't have been a material consideration 5 years ago, say, but it is now. And I think those are probably the main things that have kind of driven a greater focus on it. Certainly for us as a business, at the point at which I joined, Vital had already done some work on establishing the carbon footprint and set some net zero targets, but it wasn't a complete carbon footprint of our entire value chain. And that's something that myself and Tom and Gemma have been working really hard on. So by doing that, we have then had we now have a much better idea of where all those kind of like hotspots are, and a huge amount of it is obviously in our supply chain and in products, and therefore we need to understand what the embodied carbon is.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I mean, again, I've sort of noticed that change as well. Again, we keep coming back to this. When we look at the built environment within the building side of it, it's something that these guys seem to have been doing for a long, long time, probably over the last 10 years. And I've just sort of noticed within the last 18 months that it's now starting to become sort of more and more required from various projects, and they're starting to see it. I mean, how long? I mean, just obviously going into the sort of the need and the requirement that's come from. How long ago did you start to see the requirement coming up on Vital's radar when they started sort of coming into tenders, when you started to be requested these from customers? How long ago was it that these started to come onto your radar?
Not long ago at all. So as I said, I joined the business in July 2023. And we had a fairly big tender that came in. Maybe, in fact, it might even have started before I joined, but certainly I first became aware of it around that September, where there was a specific requirement for embodied carbon for whole life carbon assessment, and that was the first time that our work winning team had seen that. So that was so it is as recent as that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's absolutely, yeah. It's very, very similar. I mean, are you starting to see more of them as well? Are you starting to see
Yeah,
them coming in as more often
Yeah,
now since 2023?
yeah. I mean, we um, there's a number of projects that we work on that have green heat network funding, and the green heat network fund does have their market transformation commitments. One of those requirements is to measure the embodied carbon of one significant element of a heat network in order to try and build up a picture of what is the embodied carbon of a heat network. But it doesn't require that it's not actually asking for a full life cycle analysis. So there is that's kind of obviously been around for the whole time that that projects have been awarded from that fund. But I think we're starting to see it in other frameworks now, and we are starting to see individual clients requiring it. And another thing that we're seeing is some of our clients are now telling us that they are looking at things like becoming certified under PAS 2080, which would then obviously mean that our projects or anything that we did for them would have to meet the framework as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I'm starting to see a lot of that myself as well. Again, when I'm speaking to people in different sectors, sometimes in the nuclear, obviously some people within, like you say, within the grid, they've all got slightly different requirements, and sometimes that's just from specific certain areas to, like you say, to that whole life cycle analysis. So yeah, it's interesting that actually we're both seeing that. Okay, so I mean, what we've got next, sort of the next question that I've got obviously on my list was sort of the government Treasury Department recently were unveiling sort of a 10-year infrastructure strategy that sort of they're classing as a critical step in the UK's commitment to sort of achieving net zero by 2050. Appreciate that may be changing as we go through various sort of stages, but that plan for change that they've got. What's Vital Energy's views and thoughts on how embedded carbon sort of can be encouraged to sort of fit in with that 2050 sort of plan? Maybe I don't know if that is more of a Tom area. I'm not sure.
so I think for us as a business, it's a challenge because it obviously involves a significant focus on supply chains and how they can help us reduce our carbon associated with projects, whether that's operational or embodied. So over the last couple of years, I've known about how important this will be, and have been engaging with supply chains, or trying to engage with supply chains, as sort of like an awareness piece to sort of say to our supply chains, like, this is what is coming, this is what's required of us, and we need your help on it. So I think from that we found that a lot of our supply chain's knowledge on sort of EPDs or embodied carbon or net zero has been sort of, I want to say, like not as mature as ours understanding of it. So it's been about sort of just raising awareness first, so that we can eventually get to a point where we can say, like, you've had plenty of time to consider these things, now we're going to need you to start getting them. So that's been a continuous process, and it's sort of driven by like the government, like the infrastructure strategy, because a lot of our work is government funded. So we have to adhere to certain things like procurement policy and things like the PPN 0621, which is around setting net zero targets and having the public available. So and that's been part of the journey of understanding that, making sure that we're reporting our scopes to the level of detail that we think is the right sort of thing, which is to use standards such as like the GRN and the like Paris agreements. So we've basically just been trying to drive it through supply chain to improve our own reporting, and also help us win more work, and things like that.
And how have you found that? Have you found them fairly engaging? Have you found your supply chain have been fairly sort of, engaging in sort of the discussions? I know, obviously, again, sometimes it's not something that is a legal requirement at the moment to have EPDs, environmental product declarations, but is it something that you're starting to see that they are engaging with you on those sort of types of things?
Yeah, so it's been a real journey. So we've started to see only recently EPDs coming through from certain suppliers,
Yeah.
but in other instances it's been much more challenging. So some of the bigger companies that we've got quite strong partnerships with have been very engaging and collaborative with us, and others are getting there, but the process of getting an EPD is quite difficult as well. It takes a long time to get the right information and data, so they are working with us, and they're wanting to work with us because they understand the importance of it. It just takes time, like anything else, really.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest challenges, Chris, is that over 80% of our supply chain are SMEs or micro businesses, and and a lot of this can be even we're kind of going to them. Obviously, we're asking them for all sorts of information, but now we're sort of going and saying, can you tell us your scope 1 and 2 emissions? Do you have EPDs for any products that you give to us? And for businesses like that, that is a significant challenge, and we've got a responsibility to them to kind of make sure that we can, as the sort of like bigger entity in the supply chain. And I think that probably goes for other companies like us and tier ones and whatever. We can't just keep expecting that you just push this down and that they just have to respond. We have to find ways of making it manageable and not like a big economic burden as well, if we want these smaller businesses to come along on the journey.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, because again, I sit across quite a broad area of infrastructure. Within one click, I see everything from dams to tunnels to bridges to critical infrastructure, utilities, power, nuclear, various other areas. And I think you're exactly right there. It is about sometimes not necessarily all of the big companies and asking them to create EPDs, because obviously there is a preconception sometimes with some of them that it is very expensive. Obviously, things have changed, as you can appreciate. Things do change. I think one of the things that we look at continually is how can we make this more feasible for all of the SMEs all the way up to the major manufacturers, to be able to sort of to do those types of things. Obviously, we supply an EPD tool, and it really does help, obviously, when we're working with people like yourselves, to be able to sort of have that all-in-one sort of area where we can help both you guys and we can help your supply chain. But it's about education. I think there's education that we can do throughout the whole area. Again, going back to that built environment, they've been doing this for 10 years. If we look into our database of around 350,000 materials, there is a very, very big chunk of that is for the building sector. But obviously, we are now seeing in the last probably 2 years a huge push now for specific areas. So again, in your area of the power industry, they're wanting to obviously to monitor, manage, and reduce. So there's this huge area where EPDs now is this educational piece that I think we're all trying to do. And again, obviously, it's one of the things that I know we're working with you, Anna, at Vital, around sort of how can we work with your supply chain to educate them and help them. And again, rather than it always being EPD, can we work with them on getting some sort of information from them around on what data that they have got? I mean, just on that sort of side of it, do you think that the supply chain, for the smaller ones, do you think that they're going to be able to sort of work with you guys in the future to be able to get to it, to help you get to the net zero goals? And is there anything that you've got sort of in your plans of maybe what you're going to do with your supply chain? Is there anything in particular that you might do to sort of encourage more EPDs from your supply chain, or is it again just more around education?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think what we need to look at are ways of are there things that we can do that make it a bit easier for them? Are there, so for example, could we, if they haven't got an EPD, is there some way of producing like a carbon factor that's per, that's spend related, that would be a reliable, that we can use and would be defensible, so something like that, and kind of like at least getting, at least being able to get somewhere. I mean, we have actually had an example of a project that we worked on where it was a solar farm, and we asked the solar panel provider for an EPD, and they didn't have any. And then by the end of the project, they came back and said to us, well, we're going to do this now because we realise it's important, for, like, it's important for you, and it's obviously important for the market. So they made that commitment that they were going to go ahead and do it, which they might not otherwise have done. So I think some of them, some of them just need to be, for some it will just be about raising awareness. They need to know. The message that we are giving right now is, we're asking you for this information because we want to know what the situation is for ourselves. We want to understand the landscape across our supply chain. We're not necessarily going to make decisions on that basis right now, but eventually we will. Eventually we will have to, especially if we've got customers who are, PAS 2080 certified as asset owners. We're going to have to build that into to our kind of procurement and our commercial side of the business, and then it will be, if we've got one provider who has got an EPD and another who hasn't, that could be the determining factor. And I think they have to know that, so we have to make sure that they understand that. So it's not us saying, basically, if you don't do this by next week, then we're not going to use you, but we are saying, you need to show that you're kind of getting your house in order, because effectively that's what we're having to do, and we can't do it on our own, because 99% of our emissions are in scope 3.
I
think we can
I
also,
completely agree. Go on, sorry, Tom.
I think we should also get to a position where, we have a set of products and materials that we use all the time. So like steel, concrete, district heating, pipe work, heat pumps. We could probably get to a point as well where we can say to our supply chain, we want you to do this work, but you need to use these specific materials to do that, so that we can still monitor and track that. So we can take that away from them in some instances. And also work with them to sort of help with other things that might sort of be more part of the embodied carbon stuff as well that Gemma's been working on, is around where is material coming from, like where's material being taken from and going to. So there's a lot of other stuff around, just instead of just the materials and products themselves, it's about sort of the whole sort of scope of the embodied carbon and whole life cycle assessments that are involved in that.
No, I agree. I mean, I think that, as Anne and yourself, Tom, touched on there, I think there's an element where the EPDs it's just about sort of, again, the word education, but also just sort of going, have you got a plan in place? Have you started thinking about these types of things? Because I think as you guys are running through, what I'm starting to see, although they're not heavily involved in part of the tenders or the contracts as yet, I am starting to see that they're being set more targets. So there is more targets that are being put in place, and to sort of get to those targets, you need to your life cycle assessment to be more precise. So those key factors. One thing that obviously, again, that when I speak to my colleagues who look after the EPD side, when we do what we call supplier chain demonstrations, which obviously we've got planned in with you guys for at some point later this year. It's about just having those conversations where they go, right, yeah, well, we probably do need to have EPDs. Start with your main products. Start with the main things that are your key 5 products that you sell a lot of. So it helps them just to start that ball rolling. And again, one of the things that we are starting to see from some of the supply chains that, again, help you guys is they're then turning around and saying it's helping them to be more procured more often. Because like you said, Anne, although, and like Tom alluded to, although they're not specifically required to do and have EPDs, it is going to be a factor, I think, in the next couple of years, where people, you may make decisions on
Yeah,
a
definitely.
supplier who has got an EPD to somebody that hasn't. It's not necessarily now. It's about obviously people being a bit more proactive rather than reactive. And as Tom mentioned, I think there's also that thought of, can we help out? Because again, we have a database that has 350,000 materials in. Can we help the contractors out by saying, hey, listen, here's a material already that we'd like you to use that's already got an EPD? So it's about maybe helping those guys out, or helping the project out as you run through to maybe to run on different materials, or specific materials that you've already specified.
I mean, we've certainly helped Gemma as well with some of the whole life cycle assessments that we've been doing. Like the EPDs are invaluable to that, because I mean, Gemma's been doing a lot of heavy lifting on sort of the assessments, and EPDs have been really helpful, haven't they, for you on that?
Yeah, massively so. We have recently, as in like this week, got an EPD for a pretty major component, which was, I thought it was really exciting. Very exciting. If it wasn't the middle of a work day, I would have popped a little Prosecco. So it was really good. But a lot of it at the minute, so the main project we're working on at the moment with the whole life carbon assessment is a live energy centre and district heat network. So it's been just an immense amount of data collecting and organising, and sort of keeping that information in a way that when this is all completely built in 2 years' time, we can take this plethora of information and really hone in on the carbon hotspots, where things were coming from, maybe what contractors we used, what suppliers we used, why something went on for so long, what part of the construction stage for us it was, whether it was sort of like enabling works or cement pouring and things like that, which is just so much information to keep stored. But the sort of site teams and the subcontractors, again, as Sam said, a lot of them are SMEs. And I've personally found that the best way to sort of keep them on board is to just be visible. I go every week and just be there, just be around. I've had a couple of other suppliers and subcontractors sort of email me separately and go, I've just got a few questions, I just want to understand the process a bit more. And it may just be the subcontractors that are taking muck away and bringing materials in and don't necessarily need to provide EPDs, but just an awareness of it. And from what I've seen, everyone seems really quite up for it, because it's exciting and it's new and it's not really been done like this before. So it's up the supply chain, but it's the sort of subcontractors and just being there.
I think it's resource sometimes. I think that's what the issue is sometimes with this SMEs. It's resource, very similar to you guys. So historically, a lot of consultants have already done some of the work for people. I think in the past there has been people like yourselves who will have used consultants, and I'm pretty sure that everybody still does use them. But obviously, there's an element where you start to control that data and that information a little bit yourselves. And it enables you to be able to come back again and look at previous projects. We did really well there. If this project that we're doing, okay, it might be slightly different, but you go, hey, hang on a minute, this is coming in double the amount of embedded carbon that we had on that last project, but it's not too dissimilar. What did we do? Right, okay, actually, maybe it's the different components that we've used, or it's a different type of pour that we've had on our concrete, etc. It just gives you the ability to be able to sort of manage the visuals and monitor and have a look to see what's done on different projects. So and again, I think the SMEs, especially when it comes to those types of things around EPDs, again, anything that we can do where we're holding their hand through that process, and you guys are doing it, I think all of a sudden there is that element of very similar. Might sound a little bit silly, but a child doesn't want to go onto a ride, but if you hold their hand onto it, and then they feel a lot more comfortable because there's somebody saying, hey, listen, it's going to be okay, we're going to help you through it, you're not just going to be sort of thrown into the dark. So again, I think it's very much about an educational piece and trying to get, and as Anne mentioned, it's not necessarily always about the EPDs at this stage. We want everybody to get EPDs in the long term. That's what we're trying to get to as a goal, to help you guys and help everybody get to this, these net zero goals that we've got. but it's at least getting some information from them. If we can get some information, obviously our database is full of generic data points and EPDs, so at least we have something that we can maybe help to build out a generic data point if we can get some information from them. So yeah, that's really interesting that you know, we're on the sort of same level. We're at 11:30. Laura, have we got any questions? I think I can see a few, but I haven't got them all. Have we got any questions from
We do have some questions, yes. So I'm going to work through in terms of how they came through to us to make it fair. So I'll start with the first question. This is from Paul Johnson. Targets for a rail project we're working on is quite tricky. Do people typically set it by kilograms of carbon per kilometre of track and then the building itself? Or are there benchmarks we can go from for a large rail infrastructure project?
I mean, that's probably going to be more directed to me, I think. I mean, on that one, yes, people are typically going to kilograms of CO2 on everything, really. So whether it be track or whether it be in a building, but yes, they are generally separating the two out from the infrastructure side on the track and then the building itself doing it separately. Are there any benchmarks we go for a large? Not at the moment, but it is something that we're looking at, because the benchmarks, generally you can give yourself a baseline or a benchmark based off your let's say your bill of quantities or bill of materials, very, very early stages. There isn't really, and we are asked a lot to sort of go, you know, what is the average for a building of this size? We don't really have that at the moment, but it is something that we are having a look at to see if we can have some sort of standards. But again, generally at the moment, it is just worked off a bill of quantities for major
Chris, I would just to add to that, for the types of projects that we're doing, I would say that that's an issue for us as well. You know, again, that's why for us it's very much we are measuring and we are trying to focus on. You know, we obviously there's projects that we have to do this for. We've got certain deliverables that are being driven by you know, where we are on those specific jobs, but we are also planning to just build up a library of our own case studies, because it's just not there. It's not like, you know, we can't go, there's things like the RICS guidance, but it doesn't contain really, you know, like analog projects for things that we're doing. So we sort of feel we have to kind of do that ourselves before we can properly benchmark.
Great, thank you. I think possibly this may have been answered to an extent, but are there different functions of establishing baseline carbon ratings for organisations? Also, are there plans to build up a database so similar projects can be compared for carbon cost?
Let me just, sorry, I'm just trying to read it again. Could you read that out to me again?
Yeah. Are there different functions of establishing baseline carbon ratings for organisations? Also, are there plans to build up a database so similar projects can be compared for carbon cost?
Yes, we are. It is something that we're having a look at. There is, it's been discussed on quite a number of occasions. Again, trying to get that benchmarking and trying to get some averages put together. Infrastructure as a whole is quite a way behind the building sector. We have got some stuff. We do have tools within the building side of it, which is sort of that helps with early stages. That is a tool where you can put in some rudimentary information about the building, what type of building it is, the square footage. We don't have the data as yet, because infrastructure really, other than a few specific areas, like for example, maybe road and potentially sort of rail a little bit with HS2, there's a lot of the infrastructure areas who are brand new to this. So as Anne knows, you know, only, you know, sort of in the last couple of years has this started to be talked about. It's only sort of been required in the last year to 18 months. So we're still trying to build out that database. So it is something that we're trying to be able to get people, but it is sort of maybe in the roadmap, and maybe within the next probably 12 months it'll start to
so it's a similar thing. It's quite similar to the last question, but there is the built environment carbon database, but again, that it's mainly buildings. You know, I think the thing is for us, you know, we could be doing, and we have done, you know, one day you'll be doing a solar farm, and the next day you're doing an energy centre and a district heat network, and it's very, very hard to kind of say how those two things should compare. So you know, that's having, so we wouldn't necessarily have like an organisational rating, because there's so much variation, and I'm not, like, you know, and right at this moment I don't know how we, you know, I don't know how we will tackle that, but that's something that we have to think about as well.
Great, thank you. I'll move on to the next question. This one's aimed directly at you, Chris. I'm wondering if one-click LCA infrastructure is now aligned to the RICS standard whole life carbon assessment 2nd edition.
So we are currently just in testing phase. It is all been built and designed. We always make sure that we test everything out thoroughly. It is all being developed and done. We are just in the final testing phases. I believe it should be in around the second, I think the second week of May. We are looking for that to be sent out. So hopefully that answers your question. Again, we just make sure that we test everything thoroughly before we release it. So yes, it is available, but it is there. It will obviously just be available probably in the next 8 weeks.
And then on a similar thread, but directed to you guys at Vital Energy, are Vital using the RICS professional standard version 2 reporting templates for infrastructure to report to your clients?
Well, no, but it's not quite as, I mean, mainly because we're not at that point yet. But we are using the RICS standards. We're, you know, referring to like all the guidance. We've looked at RICS, we've looked at PAS 2080, we've looked at the UK GBC, Scope 3 and embodied carbon guidance. So we're kind of taking all of these things and then looking at how they best apply to our projects. But again, is that for the reasons that I've already said, we probably won't be able to lift the templates exactly and use them exactly as they are. We're going to have to adapt them.
Great, thank you. This next question feels more like a final question, but I'm going to stick to my word and read through them in order. So Ali has said, good morning, everyone. Do you think it's possible to achieve the net zero in 2050 if we keep following the traditional way of doing things? I don't know who wants to pick up that big answer first. I'll let you decide.
Well, I will. I mean, not if we keep following the traditional way of doing things, but that's why we're not. You know, this is part of that. That's why we're doing things like this. We're challenging the traditional way of doing things. We are trying to make sure that we're building up that evidence and having that data so that we can change things. And you know, we've just the Climate Change Committee obviously released the 7th carbon budget at the end of February, showing that there is still a feasible pathway to net zero by 2050, and making it very clear what all the different sectors of the economy have to do, including infrastructure in the built environment. And you know, so that's that. But I think we can see what our job is, and what we all know what our roles in it are, and that's what we're doing. Chris, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think again, it's where we're at in this journey. It's all about sort of education. We are trying new things. We are sort of, one of the things that's going to make a life cycle or a whole life cycle assessment, or doing any sort of assessment on it, is going to be around EPDs. The more precise information that we've got from the supply chain about how their materials are manufactured will make our life much easier. So again, it is a journey. It's not something that's going to be a light switch where it changes overnight while we flick it. And again, exactly hit the nail on the head. It's going to be a piece. Whether we'll get to 2050, I don't know. It all depends on how quickly we can start working together with various supply chains and manufacturers to do it. But again, I think there's also a flip on the manufacturers as well, where they will look at doing things themselves slightly differently. So they will look at the way that they do their manufacturing. So things will continually evolve and continually do it. But it's also got to be done financially viable. You know, as Anne touched on, we can't just expect all of these smaller manufacturers to be able to take on EPDs, but then that's up to us to hopefully make sure that it is financially feasible for people to be able to do it, and it's not going to be resource heavy for them. That's something that OneClick are very keen to do. Yeah,
it's definitely something that I'm seeing on the marketing side as well. When we're talking to new prospects in the business, they know that this is coming. It's going to be, you know, important, and at some point regulated and they're missing out on opportunities because of the lack of clarity in the EPDs. So yeah, I think it's really interesting. And actually, this next question is around EPDs. So I think it is anyways. It might be phrased slightly differently. What data would OneClick need from a supplier to help establish ECFs for a material if EPDs aren't present?
I'm not entirely sure what ECF is. It might be one for the EPD team. But what data would OneClick need? Again, I'd probably have to just take that offline. It was that from Mr. Melvin, from Thomas Melvin. I might have to take that offline just to find out exactly what information. But there is an element from our point of view where, again, what we are trying to do with work with certain areas, again, if we look at the utilities, the power, the gas, the water areas, who sometimes haven't got EPDs for all of their materials, we are trying to come up with what we call generic data points. So that's saying, can you give us this bit of information? I would have to come back to you on that one and go and double check with the EPD team, because otherwise I would just be throwing a dart at the dartboard and having a good guess. So yeah, there is some core information that we can get which helps fill the gap. So there will be stuff that can tick Anne's boxes temporarily. Sometimes we do this with a client to get a generic data point while they are getting 4 or 5 EPDs over the next 12 months. Again, so it doesn't mean that they have to do things so quickly, but I can come back to you on that, or on that, Thomas, to get some information about what those are.
Yeah, for sure.
We have a full data team that do all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, we'll make sure that's answered for you, Thomas. Next question from Eric. Good morning, team. Recently, there's been an argument about how net zero and decarbonisation affect industries and the economy. OneClick LCA team, as sustainability leaders in the community, what can you do to boost the economy and support our industries at the same time concerning reducing carbon footprint strategies? Another big question.
So I'm just trying to have a look at it and see where I can answer sort of as broadly as I can. So again, one of the things that we try and sort of pitch, and again, when I say pitch, we are not we're obviously in business, but we try to be thought leaders. We try to be sort of on the button and working with everybody. We don't always have the answers for everything, but one of the things that we're trying to do is we're trying to obviously utilize our tools, our various tools that we have across the buildings, the infrastructure, and helping supply chains with EPDs. The whole idea really is where there is a cost to the supply chain to produce EPDs. The whole idea is as Anne mentioned earlier, we're hoping, and what does happen is that when the design teams, when the consultants, when the people who are doing the whole life cycle assessments, especially at early stage, when they are looking at which suppliers should they use, when they start getting down to that point, they will start having a look to the people who have got EPDs. Maybe not now, today, but over the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, they will start to do that. So the idea is that helping the economy is hopefully going to be boosting more procurement through more people by them having EPDs available to projects. Again, obviously, Tom may have a little bit more information on that, but
yeah,
that's
Chris,
what I see.
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, there is, there has been obviously a lot of discussion on this in recent weeks, but there is a CBI report that came out that showed again evidence that the kind of like green economy, the net zero, focusing on that was creating good jobs, was reducing emissions and creating energy security. And just from from Vital's point of view, we've grown massively as a business in the past 5 years. Even in I've been in the business less than 2 years, and I think the headcount has increased from about 600 to almost 800 staff in that time. So clearly I think the message is also quite often, when we're identifying carbon hotspots in our supply chain and we address that, we're actually also saving costs. We're making things more efficient, and therefore driving an economic benefit that way. So I think that's the kind of the broader context that this all sits in.
Yeah, can I just add to that, with sort of decarbonising it, because the economy and carbon are so tightly connected. The more that this sort of low carbon heat and energy is taken up, the more effective that sort of separation of carbon and the economy will be, so that moving forward, things that are traditionally high carbon, high economic input, that sort of correlation will just go down and down and down, so that the sort of perspective on low carbon choices, whether that's in industry or domestic levels, that perception will dissipate the more that the economy and carbon can be separated.
Yeah, good point.
Great, thank you. I think we have time for another maybe 3 questions. So this one's quite specific to you, Chris. Again, don't panic. In relation to building up database for comparisons and benchmarking, I started offering a consultancy service to the water industry and UK infrastructure. Should I push new clients to get their own one-click LCA license so they can achieve benchmarking, or use my own license?
So there's 2 ways of looking at it, and there's 2 different ways. We obviously have different licenses that are available. Some of the licenses that are available are what we would call a sharer license. So that enables, we call it a carbon strategy pack. It enables somebody like yourself, is it Oliver, to have a license. But what he can do is he can have his own license, but then maybe his clients could have what we call a carbon strategy pack. So the carbon strategy pack allows then Oliver to continue to do his consultancy work, but he would work inside his client's license. So therefore, they're keeping all of the data. They hold all of the data, but he can then obviously then still do all his consultancy work and do that particular stage. So there is 2 ways. It just depends on how they want to do it. Some people don't have the resource or the time, or they don't want to get involved, but we are actually seeing a huge uptake now of more and more clients actually having an active license, and it doesn't matter whoever they're using. It's not taking away any of the work that they're currently doing, either from consultants or architects. All they're doing is they're now working more collaboratively. So there is multiple licenses, and again, it's all about collaboration. Can we work with the designers and the contractors and the clients so everybody can see what we're doing, and work together to try and get the best outcomes?
Excellent, thank you. A couple more questions, and then we'll just wrap up, I think, today's session. We've covered a lot of ground, but Neil has said, we're continually seeing EPDs provided, often level 3, that are lacking lots of generic average figures or non-disclosed or incomplete data, especially in the B categories. Does one-click see any regulations being introduced to ensure information becomes both standardised and complete?
I'll be honest. And your name was again Neil. I would have to go and double check. It's probably something more for the EPD and data team, because I probably wouldn't have an answer on that. I don't know whether, Laura, you can just maybe ping my email address into here. So anything that we haven't covered off, or I have sort of, and again, it's not for me to bat away in any way, shape or form. I'm not always the expert on all of these things. Although I will tell my wife that I am the expert on everything. I'm definitely my children. I'd have to double check, because I do know that again, there is a bit of this is sort of maybe a bit more of a government thing. We're trying to work with the government around EPDs to try and get it a little bit more standardized, to try and get things a little bit more standardized around those areas. So there may be some sort of discrepancies or things that are slightly incomplete. But on this particular question, if you could ping that to me, I could obviously get that over to our data team, an EPD team, and they would probably be able to give you a much better answer, Neil. So if Laura will share my email.
Can I just add to that, Chris? Sorry, yeah. I think there is like a couple of standards for how to produce an EPD. I think the ISO Plus district heating pipework that we got EPDs for earlier this week is to a ISO standard, which one-click suggests that there should be 2 for them to be added to the EPD library. I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but there certainly are standards out there.
Yeah,
on EPDs.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to check of what those standards were. But yeah, maybe again, like I say, if we could dig that out, Tom, and we can let Neil know.
Okay. Okay. The very last question, I think, and then we'll wrap up. So, as a tier 2 construction contractor working with local supply chain, nearly all SMEs, and trying to resource developing our own EPD and carbon reporting infrastructure before we can really take on some of the burden of SMEs, What ideas or advice would you have for creating resource efficiencies for this kind of transition where possible, where resource burdens and spare capacity are a concern? And thanks, all really valuable sessions. So maybe that's a nice one to end on.
I'll maybe, well, so I think there's some simple, well, they might, I'm saying simple, our finance team might disagree with me, but you know, there are things that are not related to the EPDs at all that might make things easier, like just ask it, like how we set up our purchase orders and invoices, for example, to make sure that you're easily getting the information that you need. I don't know, Gemma, would you agree with that based on what you're seeing, it being at the kind of sharp end of try to get this?
Yeah, the thing is, a lot of the information that I've been collecting at the moment, people do already record it because it's all activity logic sense data that has been needed in operations before. It's just never been collected and applied in this way. So it's just sort of getting the invoices of especially sort of products brought in, like it's really specialist components that come from other countries, different parts of Europe. Just put on the transfer note where it came from, and then I'll leave them alone for the rest of the job.
Yeah, I think some of it's really simple. You know, I think we shouldn't overlook that either. That it's just that, you know, that there's, I think you can get carried away thinking that you need all sorts of like fancy tools thing, but you just, you know, a lot of it is really, you know, is that some things will just be quite minor tweaks, and that will, you know, kind of help a lot. And I think it's, you know, making sure that we do those things so that you're trying to make it less manual and make that a bit more efficient, and then allowing everybody a bit of breathing space to do the bigger tasks.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Great. Well, listen, thank you, everyone. We had lots of questions there. So thank you to everyone who's joined us and stuck with us for the last almost hour. It's been a really great session. Hopefully you found it really valuable, insightful yourselves. Just a quick note to say, if you do want us to get in touch either on the infrastructure LCA side, EPD side, we can connect you with someone at One Click LCA just to have a bit of a consultation and talk about your own projects. So you will see a poll pop up on your screen now. Please just let us know there. If you want us to, we'll be in touch very shortly after the session. And then finally, we have a follow-up 30-minute quick-fire demo of the One Click LCA infrastructure platform coming up on Wednesday, the 26th of March at 9:30 in the morning. So anyone who wants to join that, please scan the QR code. I will also drop the link in the chat just for those like me who can never get to their phone cameras quick enough. So please do join us for that. That will be a very short kind of overview of how the One Click LCA infrastructure tool works. And that's it. I guess just all that's left to say is thank you very much to our guest speakers for joining us today. Thanks, Chris, as well, for taking the time. And yes, thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, Anne. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Gemma.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Have a lovely week, guys.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.